dev-Rasevik. Andre is both an engineer and an educator, and he has over a decade of experience in both building and architecting software to run both natively and in the browser, as well as working actively on designing and implementing new courses on modern web application development at the University of Maryland. When he's not in front of the computer coding, he can be found either in his workshop crafting custom cabinets or wherever one of his 3 kids has taken him on an adventure. So thank you very much, Andre.
You're welcome. Do I have the ability to share my screen?
Yes, you do. And I'm
Great.
sharing the link to your slide deck right now.
Excellent. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's enjoying their day. So let me start off my talk. So the title of my talk is Motivating Students to Create and Leveraging the Web Environment for Doing so. My background is, as Kim said, I like to call myself a recovering physicist and electrical engineer, but I also work professionally as a software architect. I lecture at the University of Maryland. I'm also a student there, and I definitely enjoy in my lack of free time making custom cabinets. But most importantly, what I am is a father. And the reason I mentioned that, and the reason I put my children there, is that my father taught me, who was not an educator, but he was a journalist, but he said that the most valuable classroom he ever had was being a parent. And so through my kids' eyes, I see, you know, people who have that curiosity and that zeal and lust for learning. And I think that needs to be captured and held onto and emboldened. And there's nothing worse than I can see when students get frustrated and intimidated and think that they can't do something, which I know that they can. It's just, it's really the approach. And also, you know, in the world in which we live in, I think it's really important for the youth to give them a sense of what their options are. I think a lot of people feel, I know when I was, you know, growing up, you know, you needed a computer, and ironically, to code, it would cost thousands of dollars back then for like what is worth like probably a nickel now with the old Commodore 64 when I was a kid. But like, you know, the web is very powerful and I love it for many, many things. But one of the things I love the most about it is it's a great vehicle to teach students how to program and develop and think problems and develop problem solving skills that you really only need like a $300 Chromebook for. So where do we start? We give them the fundamentals. The fundamentals to me consist of, on the website, 3 things: HTML5, CSS, and what I really harp on is the JavaScript web APIs. The JavaScript web APIs is really what JavaScript as a language was originally designed to do. These are the interfaces that allow you to dynamically interact with a traditional website. It's prior to what we have now for HTML5, there was, you know, when it was coming up, there was something called dynamic HTML. And that's the dynamic behaviors where we got JavaScript from. Or excuse me, we got with JavaScript. So one thing, if you follow any blog sites or literature or any of these Twitter feeds of notable developers, and it's funny how like with Twitter and whatnot, like developers have become almost like rock stars. It's great. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of noise out there. You can think about, you'll hear things about like the latest libraries and frameworks and build tools and all this nonsense. And a lot of this was an explosion that started after 2015 with what was the first major release to the JavaScript language. And it's called ECMAScript 2015, which is the actual definition of the language, and JavaScript is the implementation of it. Prior to that is what's known as ECMAScript 5, and it had been, I believe, at least 7 years since there had been an update to the language. And so that's why starting at that point, there was that gave the burst to new frameworks, things like React, things like now we have Vue, Node. All of that was stemmed from and grew out of ECMAScript 2015. But under the hood, all that stuff, it boils down to what is traditionally called now vanilla JavaScript, which is the JavaScript prior to 2015 ES5, which is what I believe is fundamental for anyone who wants to be successful in web application development. And I use the word application very specifically because there's a misnomer that when we say web development, that it's something less than writing programs that run on your desktop, like native applications. It's not. Crafting applications is kind of a ubiquitous skill, regardless of the final destination and platform. So, if you've taught your students, HTML5 and CSS and just a little bit of JavaScript, kind of the question is like, well, what's next? What else can I do? Well, in my opinion, and all of this really is my opinion, both as a student, someone who's been working actively as a developer in industry for over a decade, and come back to educating as well. I would start with JavaScript because it can run in the browser, and what it allows students to do is get this feeling of instant, I just built this and it's running and I can click on it and I can interact with it and I can see things moving around, and it's got a really positive feedback loop. The main frustration like students have who are, let's say, electrical engineers at universities and they start learning a language like C is they get these compile time errors. They don't know what any of that means. It's just all this gibberish. And at the high school level, when we really want, like I said, we want to capture that creative and that excitement and that zeal for learning, to do that, I don't think you have to focus in so much what's under the hood, but rather give them a tool and tools to actually just go out and build. And then as they get development experience with that and facility with it, then there's plenty of time to start peeling back the leaves or, like an onion, and see what's living on underneath. And also with the browser, you just need a text editor and a browser and they can learn JavaScript. They can learn every aspect of vanilla JavaScript, and even like libraries like React. There's tools for that as well. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need a $2,000 MacBook Pro, none of that. You just need a browser and a text editor. That's why I love it. But there are multiple platforms that JavaScript runs in. This is why I kind of love it as a language. So not only can it run in the browser, it's now been adapted to with this library called Node.js to run on the server. And when I say server, I mean like your physical machine. You can run lines of code on your desktop, laptop, just like it was if it was running in the browser. This allows you to explore what is a web server. What does that mean? When we do a request in the browser, what is all that going from typing it into the search bar to hitting enter, to the nav bar and hitting enter, hitting all your DNSs to finally resolving on the server and hitting there. What does all that mean and look like? Well, you can do all that with JavaScript. And then also on a really even more fun level, it also runs on devices. So there's a thing called Tessel. It's analogous to a Raspberry Pi, if any of you are familiar with those. So it's a little embedded teeny tiny computer. I don't know what they go for. You can check out in the link there. And then with Johnny 5, which is a library, you can use JavaScript and Node to run programs on this and build robotics. And again, it's that word I'm constantly going to be using. It's building, 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 giving that positive feedback of, and also, getting stuck is a healthy thing, because it's more, I've learned more from being stuck than just like being able to just coast down and be like, oh, okay, this is pretty easy. If it's not challenging, you're not going to learn. So, what's the long-term goal? Teach students the fundamentals so they can go out and experiment. I feel from what I've seen with students that I teach at the university, there's a lack of a willingness to break things to see how they work. Everyone's scared to make mistakes. Everyone wants to be perfect with with every keystroke, and that's not reality by any stretch of the imagination. And the browser offers you limitless possibilities to go out and explore and learn different things. And it also prevents you from getting caught up in distractions of details like compiling issues, deployment, and what do those words even mean? I have I could poll university students with CS degrees, and they probably wouldn't give an adequate description, much less a high school student. At that level, I think it's all about encouraging, motivating, stimulating, giving them a firm foundation that they can then go on and do whatever it is they choose to. And, that leads to, well, what is there for them after high school? Well, they can obviously, hopefully, always have the option of pursuing a college degree. In my opinion, CS departments are still catching up to the web. And what I mean catching up to the web, I mean catching up to teaching web technologies and how to craft code that runs in a remote environment. We're still teaching things like, hey, here's Java, you compile it, it runs on your machine, and here's how you share it. Well, most of the code that is running the world runs in the cloud. There are these things called boot camps where they could further refine their web skills that they learned at the high school level. But I would say be careful. Like one of the most ones locally, there's General Assembly. They do a lot of, in my opinion, false advertising where they're like, hey, we'll take you from knowing nothing to being able to get hired as a junior software engineer in 12 weeks. And I've had offers to teach there, and they asked me to teach a lecture on object-oriented programming in 3 hours. And, we spend years teaching that at the university. So to me, I'm wary of those. The best one out there by far is this one called Hack Reactor. They do prep work courses for their students. They're very selective in who they admit. And, I've had a lot of friends who had degrees in electrical engineering or physics or whatnot, didn't really know how to code, and they would go to Hack Reactor to kind of, not have to deal with all the hoops to getting a formal CS degree when they wanted to just go and work. And then the last option I really see is, if we give them enough skills at the high school level, there's nothing to prevent them from getting the opportunity to get jobs. Like, 90% of what I've learned as a professional engineer, and software developer, I've learned from my coworkers and working on interesting problems at the jobs I've had. That's not to take anything away from my formal coursework, but there's no replacing experience. There's just not. So I don't know what everyone's background is, whether you guys have, written code, worked as software engineers or whatnot, and so that can be kind of, and I know that there's that hurdle of like, well, where can I go and do this stuff myself? So to me, one of the best websites out there, and it's free, is this class by a friend of mine called Wes Boss. It's called javascript30.com, where he basically has a very similar approach to what I have. And it's why one of the reasons why we talk so much is that he believes in small little applications that if you build them and it's got that positive feedback. So I'll create a animation in one exercise. I'll create a clock in another. I'll create a slider in another. And so he's got a list of 30 exercises, and all he's doing behind the scenes is getting you familiar and comfortable with JavaScript, how it works in the browser, and getting you more and more confident along the way. So I think it's a great resource for students. I've definitely used or adapted some of those in my own coursework for my students, but I also think it's a fabulous learning tool for teachers and instructors as well. I'm gonna stop right here. Are there any questions that people have?
Perfect timing, Andre.
Thanks. I just put up there like possible suggestions that I have for possible future talks and workshops with everyone here. We could build an app together. One of the popular tools are React, Vue, or Angular. If you were curious to learn about it, we could build a simple API. We could also set up a server running in the cloud. We could use something like DigitalOcean, and just go through those things if you were ever curious to learn more about it. But let me change my view so I can see if there are questions being posted.
We have around 5 minutes for questions.
Okay. Excellent. you seeing any questions there, or have I put everybody to sleep?
I have not seen any questions.
Is anyone here actually teaching active web applications or web technologies at a school?
Okay.
Okay.
Already, she says, which application
Oh.
do you use for API?
For building a web API? Is that your question, Artie?
Yes, that's right.
I mean, professionally, or like someone, are you asking me like, hey, if someone wants to build me an API, what would I use?
No, just for the classroom activity purpose. We have one activity for freshmen where they create an API to connect to the server for Project Lead the Way. That they have created just a dummy server, I guess, for that particular purpose. It does not. I'm not sure if it gives the complete takeaway of the whole idea of API.
Well, so I mean, one of the reasons I think it's great to use JavaScript for this is because you can do everything both at all ends of the stack. So one of the problems you have with web is that there is a lot of different technologies working together at the same time. So, especially with students, getting their feet wet, writing a server in Ruby as an example, and then asking them to, I mean, in the browser, you're going to have to write JavaScript. There's no way around that. Despite what Google wanted to do with Dart, JavaScript's not going anywhere. But on the server side, if now you tell students, okay, well, here's this one programming language, and now you have to switch gears and learn another programming language simultaneously to do stuff on the server side. To me, that's a big ask of students. I mean, I feel schizophrenic at some days of my job because I do things in Go, I Rust and C++, and it's like, I don't even know what I'm doing half the day. So, keeping it focused and germane to one environment, I think is crucial, especially at that age and level. So I would just do it in Node and Express in JavaScript if I were you.
Andre, could you stop sharing your screen so we can see
sure.
you? Thanks.
We're too busy exploring the resources. That's fantastic to hear. Yeah, and what's one to that one before? It's nice with React, Vue, and Angular to show, hey, I can spin up the exact same website in 3 different frameworks, and the end user has no idea. They all look identical. In fact, you'd probably appreciate why for most things you'd use React or Vue over Angular, because Angular is just so much extra dead weight carrying around.